And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Starting off with today's sea ice analysis, ice of varying concentrations around Nunivak Island here, and the heavier ice extending into northern Kuskokwim Bay, but as you head just to the south there, it vanishes completely toward the southern bay, and hardly anything there in Bristol Bay. So moving on to tonight's weather, we've got this low continuing to move northward and weaken, but it'll keep snow going along the Arctic coast here across the northwest interior, all the way down into Norton Sound, but starting to clear out over the southwest part of the state. This week low brings some moisture up to the Alaska Peninsula, but nothing too heavy, and then snow showers for the western Aleutians. This low pushes or continues the rain and gusty winds. Once the front moves in, and winds will come down a little bit over the panhandle today or tonight. And low pressure there near Yakutat with some moisture extending westward, keeping it kind of damp along the North Gulf Coast. Areas of snow here in the Susitna-Manuska Valley down into northern Cook Inlet there, and possibly into western Prince William Sound that could extend up north of the Alaska Range. And then for tomorrow, weak trough with rain or snow showers in the northern panhandle, rain showers down toward Prince of Wales Island. Mostly dry across southern Alaska. Still some light snow going on up here from the Koyukuk Valley westward to Kotzebue, then up the northwest coast. And that low pressure area keeping light snow along the western central Arctic coast. This system bringing rain back into Kodiak Island with snow on the northern and northwest, so actually the western side of that system there for the Alaska Peninsula on up into toward Togiak. Dillingham looking at snow tomorrow. And dry for the Aleutians, kind of in between this low up here southwest of St. Lawrence Island, and the next system down to the south that on Wednesday pushes up with increasing winds and moisture there for the Aleutians west of Nikolsky. Winds will increase there over the eastern Aleutians. Should be a dry day with some clearing. Pribilof Islands, light winds as well, right into Bristol Bay. The Alaska Peninsula looking good. Kodiak Island, not bad as well. Also up here through the central interior with some high pressure developing over the central Brooks Range, some flurries over the eastern Arctic coast, and some flurries there for the western North Slope. And still looking at some snow shower activity going on in the Susitna-Manuska valleys, extending down across, possibly clipping the Anchorage area, turning an arm right on into western Prince William Sound. And low pressure moves up, brings gale force winds back to the southern coast of the Panhandle with rain, central and southern areas changing over to mostly snow on up toward actually Juneau northward to Skagway. And for the coastal water forecasts down along the south coast, west winds 20 to 25 knots, west winds 25 to 30 knots for the north coast, and south winds at 25 gusting 40 knots for Lynn Canal, southeast at 20 with higher gusts Stevens Passage, light southerlies for Clarence Strait. But those increased to 40 knots for Clarence Strait during the day on Wednesday. East 40 knots here for Prince of Wales Island. The central coast, lighter winds northeast at 15 knots. And the north coast, east winds 15 to 20 knots. Small craft advisories for Lynn Canal and Stevens Passage for north winds at 25 knots. Prince William Sound, west winds at 15 knots. With west winds at 20 to 25 knots there for the North Gulf Coast. Barren Islands, southwest winds at 20 knots and south to southwest winds 15 knots. Kamishak Bay and southern Cook Inlet. Northern Cook Inlet, light southerlies. And northwest at 20 for northern Cook Inlet on Wednesday. Northwest 30 knot winds, southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay. Westerly gales for the Barren Islands. And northwest at 35 knots for the western North Gulf Coast. Prince William Sound, northeast winds 20 knots with 6-foot seas. In Kodiak Island, southerly winds for the day Tuesday at 15 to 25 knots. The Alaska Peninsula, north to northeast winds at 20 to 25 knots. Winds east at 20 for Bristol Bay. For Wednesday, Kodiak area, westerlies 25 to 30 knots. Alaska Peninsula, west to south winds at 15 to 25 knots. And northwest at 20 for Bristol Bay. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, we've got west-northwest winds in the forecast at 20 knots, about the same for Adak and Atka. And then out here to the west, you can see variable to west winds at 15 to 20 knots. And then for the western Aleutians there on Wednesday, northeast or east-northeasterlies, say ADAC out to Shemya, east to northeast winds, gale force 30 to 40 knots. Gale force west easterlies also for ADAC and ATCA, and southeast winds 30 knots for Unalaska Island. And for the southwest coast, for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, east winds at 15 knots, south winds 20 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, south winds 30 knots for St. Matthew Island, and south at 20 for the Pribilofs. Outlook for Wednesday, Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, east winds at 15, southeast at 15 for the southwest coast, southwest at 20 for St. Matthew Island, and south at 20 for the Pribilofs. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, brisk wind advisories, west winds at 25 knots for the western and central coast. Brisk wind advisories also, but southwest winds 25 knots for those areas, and the Chukchi Sea, west-southwest 15 to 20. And then for the day on Wednesday, Chukchi Sea, southeast winds 10 to 20 knots, southwest at 15 for the western Arctic coast, west at 15 on the central coast, and the eastern coast looking at west winds at 20 to 30 knots.